Many of you should know who Hajime Tabata is by now, but for those who don't, not only has he directed games such as Final Fantasy Type 0 and Crisis Core Final Fantasy 7, he's also currently serving as the director on Final Fantasy 15 after taking over the role from Tetsuya Nomura. From a personal standpoint, he's someone who massively inspires me with his drive and enthusiasm. He's always rather cheerful, but if you actually look at what he's tried to achieve since being in the spotlight of Final Fantasy 15, it's nuts. For one, he implemented an entire restructure of BD2 and is carrying not only the ever-growing weight of the Final Fantasy franchise on his shoulders with the success or failure of Final Fantasy 15, but also the Japanese gaming development scene. This year, he has been pretty frank about things, and despite his positive outward appearance, he doesn't mince his words. At one point in an interview, he even talked about how he had to tell his team that they aren't special just because they're working on Final Fantasy, they have to earn that right. Lauren and I were actually fortunate enough to meet him last year, and his personality is very infectious. It's why, despite a few grumbles here and there, I believe the Active Time reports have been a huge success. He genuinely cares about the community and wants to make sure we have a voice. It's also why we have so much faith in Final Fantasy 15's ability to become a memorable game in the franchise. With Final Fantasy 15 now less than a month away, we therefore thought it'd be perfect to start off our Final Fantasy 15 content season by looking at the big man himself. So here's 10 things you probably didn't know about Hajime Tabata. Enjoy! He's only ever finished one Final Fantasy game. Yep, you heard me correctly. Hajime Tabata has only ever finished one Final Fantasy game, the first one, which is also the first one he played. After finishing this, he went on to play Final Fantasy 2 but got bored and never finished it, noting that he really didn't enjoy a system that promoted harming yourself to improve. This actually came up in a conversation with series creator Sakaguchi, where Tabata opens up about not being very passionate about the franchise when he joined Square Enix. He noted that when he was early on in his fledgling career, he actually avoided playing Final Fantasy games because he didn't want to fall in love with the franchise. Why? Well, he didn't think he'd ever actually have the opportunity to make games of that stature. If he could bring back any Square Enix IP, it'd be Dexter. Out of all the IPs Square Enix have command over, Hajime Tabata is most interested in bringing back Dexter, which is known as Tegaza in Japan. The original game, released back in 1985 by Game Arts on the PC in Japan, is an arcade-style run-and-gun shooter game, and Square were actually given the license to port it over to the NES. Fun fact for you all, Dexter was actually ported to the Amiga for the Western release in 1988 by a then struggling third-party video game developer called Activision. Anyway, back to the actual point. The franchise has actually seen a couple of different versions throughout the years. There was a sequel called Dexter 2, which released in 1989, and a remake of the original game called Dexter 95, which released in 1995. In 2009, Square Enix actually came back to work on the game, doing a complete remake of the original, which they called Dexter Neo. Anyone remember it? Who knows, once Final Fantasy 15 is all wrapped up, Hajime Tabata may get his chance to work on that coveted title, Dexter 3. Before joining Square Enix, he actually worked at Tecmo. Hajime Tabata has been in the video games industry for around 2 decades, and before joining Square Enix, he is said to have worked at numerous publishers in Japan. However, his first game credits on record were at Tecmo. He's credited as being the main planner on the original Gallop Racer, and then the director of Gallop Racer 2. Later derivatives of these games would be known as G1 Jockey in the West. He then went on to work as a planner on Monster Rancher 2 and served as the event director on Deception 3 Dark Delusion. It meant that by the time he joined Square Enix, he had quite a variety of titles under his belt and experiences. There's a fun fact about this, he had actually been looking to work at Square for a little while, even before the merger with Enix in 2003, but things just didn't work out for him at the time. However, after leaving Tecmo, he started working freelance on a mobile game, and some of his friends thought his talents would actually be better served working on mobile games at Square Enix, so they got him an interview. And the rest, as they say, is history. He often only gets 3 hours sleep a night. When asked about his sleep patterns, Tabata replied that the interviewer from Polygon would be appalled. He opened up saying that for everyone's reference, he only sleeps for 3 hours every night. I don't know about you guys, but I need my sleep. I could function for maybe a day or two on only 3 hours sleep a night, but on a consistent basis, no thanks. The kind of sad thing is that Tabata is aware of the pitfalls, saying that he knows that the sleep pattern is likely to send him to an early grave. I really hope this isn't true. Tabata, get some more sleep, man! Final Fantasy VI is his favourite game. Despite only finishing one Final Fantasy game, Tabata has since researched the others to help him prepare for his directorship of Final Fantasy 15. It's actually something he did in conjunction with Nomura. After doing so, he feels that Final Fantasy 7 is the most influential game in the series, but that Final Fantasy 6 has the most wow factor. Tabata also somewhat falls into that classic first game syndrome we always talk about, as he feels that Final Fantasy 1, his first game, is the most memorable game in the franchise. He said it will always hold a special place in his heart. Aww. Zack Fair is his favourite character. After working as the director on Crisis Core, Hajime Tabata came to love Zack Fair as a character in the Final Fantasy franchise more than any other that he's worked on or experienced. His main reason for liking him? Well, I bet you were all hoping for something super deep and meaningful, weren't you? Unfortunately, Tabata states that it's simply because he just spent a lot of time working on him. Another fun fact for you here, but did you know that Tabata is actually one of the main reasons the compilation of Final Fantasy VII was expanded in the way it was? Not long after joining Square Enix, the question internally of a mobile game focused around the Turks was raised. In response, Tabata proposed Before Crisis. Likewise, with the launch of the PSP, Yoshinori Kitase challenged Tabata with creating a new Final Fantasy game for this console. Upon consultation with Nomura and due to his experience with Before Crisis, they decided on creating a game to showcase Zack's story. This became Crisis Core. Dragon Quest III is his favourite JRPG of all time. Alright, so we know that Hajime Tabata has given a few reasons for avoiding the Final Fantasy franchise, but it's interesting that Dragon Quest didn't suffer the same fate. When taking part in an AMA on Reddit, Tabata stated that Dragon Quest III is his favourite JRPG of all time. As a side note, did you know that despite now being available on mobile phones, Dragon Quest III has never actually seen a console release in Europe? And when it originally released in Japan in 1988, did you know that it was so widely anticipated that over 300 students were arrested for truancy? People were even mugged for their copies of the game. This led to the creation of an urban myth that a law was passed mandating that Dragon Quest games had to be launched only on Saturdays in the future to stop the decrease in productivity. In actuality, this isn't true. The decision not to release on weekdays was entirely Enix's decision for whatever reason. It was actually also the best-selling game in the series until Dragon Quest IX released in 2009, some 21 years later. If he failed at making video games, he wanted to make instant noodles. By now, I hope that hearing something like this about Tabata doesn't sound too wacky, but yes, if his dreams of becoming a successful video game creator failed, his backup plan was to create instant noodles. Not only that, he wanted to create his own brand of instant noodles. Apparently, when he was at university, he used to eat a lot of instant food. Noodles, ramen noodles, udon noodles, basically just instant noodles. He loved them so much that he said that if he had not gone into entertainment, he had dreams of working for a noodle company and even making his own brand. He candidly mentioned that he often gets inspired by things that are really close to him. He can't see much further than that. Wait a minute. Now that Cup of Noodles sponsor deal makes so much more sense. Tabata, you evil genius. He has dreams of creating a historical simulation game. During middle school, Tabata got hooked on a historical simulation game from Koei, and that's what actually convinced him that he wanted to make video games professionally. Because of the strong feelings he has for that genre, it's the type of game that he really wants to make in the future. However, it's somewhat ironic though. He actually spent quite a few years at Tecmo, but left before they merged with Koei. Just imagine, if he'd have stayed, he would have likely got the chance to fulfill that dream by working on any of the ever-expanding Warriors games. Still, if he hadn't left and joined Square Enix, we might be no closer to getting Final Fantasy 15. Just think about that. As a side note, Tabata actually only joined Square Enix 2 to 3 years before Final Fantasy Versus 13 was announced, and in that time he's worked on properties such as Before Crisis, Last Order, Crisis Core, Kingdom Hearts Coded, Third Birthday, Final Fantasy Type 0, and Final Fantasy Agato. That's a massive list. Tabata was brought on to help with Final Fantasy 15 over 4 years ago. We all know that Hajime Tabata became the director of Final Fantasy 15 2 years ago in 2014, but he was actually involved in the project as long ago as 2012. Once Final Fantasy Type 0 was wrapped up, Tabata and his team moved over to work on Final Fantasy 15, although at that point it was still publicly known as Final Fantasy Versus 13. He became co-director a year later in 2013 and then director in 2014 when Nomura was moved away to focus on Kingdom Hearts 3, and apparently the Final Fantasy VII remake. As a slight hindsight fun fact, 4 years ago when speaking to GameSpot, before we knew Tabata was even working on the game, he spoke about what he would personally like to see happen to the Final Fantasy franchise. In this interview, he spoke about his vision for a game where the player could move freely around an open world setting, and a game where the player could touch the world and enjoy feeling its presence. Alright, so it's a kind of loose statement. I just thought it was pretty interesting that he was already talking about the next main series game and what he wanted from it, even though at that time he wasn't even the co-director. Alright, so that's 10 things you probably didn't know about Hajime Tabata. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to hit that like button and share it to help this channel grow. Make sure you hit that subscribe button too so you get regular updates. Until next time, this is Daryl, signing out.